Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to decode how a simple 1993 pitch, which, by the way, was originally floating around under the working title Insomnia Cafe, somehow became an absolute, unprecedented global touchstone. Because we aren't just talking about a popular TV show here, we're looking at a structural and commercial paradigm that is literally still influencing the global entertainment industry today. So let's dive right in and look at the architecture of how creators David Crane and Marta Kaufman built this massive phenomenon.
Here's how we're going to break it all down today. First, building the surrogate family. Second, the sitcom success formula. Third, shaping 90s material culture. Fourth, viewing through a modern lens. And finally, the billion-dollar aftermarket.
All right, let's kick things off with part 1, building the surrogate family. So, to really understand the show's micro-level architecture, we have to look at the egalitarian system it was built upon. The creators designed this highly synchronized ensemble cast, and they grounded it in 6 very distinct archetypes. You've got Rachel as the maturing runaway, Monica is the maternal anchor, Phoebe acts as the eccentric outlaw, Ross is the neurotic academic, Chandler uses sarcasm as a shield, and Joey is the lovable hedonist. And the creators designed it this way deliberately so that no single actor held top billing. It's a perfect balance of psychological defenses and comedic utilities, which meant literally any combination of these characters could sustain an independent subplot.
Now, behind the scenes, there's a brilliant data-driven narrative strategy at play. When you look at the quantitative analysis of the scripts, it shows that the writers actively used Ross and Rachel to drive the high-stakes serialized drama, giving them each over 9,000 spoken lines throughout the run of the series. But to maintain that crucial structural equilibrium, they relied heavily on Chandler. He actually had the highest overall screen appearances, and his job was to anchor the everyday episodic comedy.
26%. That is a massive number. It represents the sheer spatial dominance of Monica's apartment. Over a quarter of all scenes in the entire series took place in this single location. It functioned as the ultimate domestic sanctuary, really framing the peer group as a surrogate family unit where they could process career changes, romantic triumphs, and all their interpersonal conflicts.
Moving right along to part 2, the sitcom success formula.
Okay, the crucial point we need to talk about here is the contrast between the show's absolute peak and its late-stage creative fatigue. Television historians pretty broadly agree that seasons 4 and 5 were the golden era. The show was operating like a first-rate Broadway farce, slamming doors, perfectly paced dramatic irony, the whole shebang. On the flip side, by season 9, they really hit a creative trough. The writers had basically exhausted the natural character progressions and started resorting to some contrived plots, like that highly polarizing Joey, Rachel, and Ross love triangle.
But man, when they were at their peak, they utilized specific structural tools flawlessly. Take the bottle episode, for example. A perfect execution of this is Season 3's The One Where No One's Ready. Ross has this museum benefit, and the entire episode is confined to Monica's living room in real time. The script squeezed just massive comedic tension out of trivial domestic friction, like Joey putting on literally every single piece of Chandler's clothing over a petty argument about a chair.
Another absolute cornerstone of their formula was dramatic irony. This technique completely peaked in the Season 5 episode, The One Where Everybody Finds Out. Phoebe and Rachel discover Monica and Chandler's secret relationship, and instead of just confronting them, they initiate this wild psychological game of chicken. Both sides are aggressively pushing the boundaries of a fake seduction simply because they don't know that we know they know we know. It is a masterclass in situational comedy.
Which brings us to what historians often consider the single best episode of the entire series, the one with the embryos. It combined this meta-narrative trivia contest that actually tested the show's own lore, and it all culminated in Rachel screaming the fabricated job title Transmonster. The dramatic irony of the girls losing their primary domestic space, Monica's apartment, provided this massive structural shakeup that completely re-energized the middle of the 4th season.
All right, Section 3, Shaping 90s Material Culture.
Stepping outside the scripts for a second, we have to look at costume designer Deborah McGuire. She established strict stylistic pipelines directly tied to each character's socioeconomic background and psychological evolution. You have Rachel evolving from a dependent mall girl to high-end corporate chic. Monica wore pragmatic athletic denim that softened into romantic silhouettes as she matured. Phoebe was layered in these bohemian 70s tactile fabrics, and the men had equally defined arcs. Chandler shed his awkward sweaterettes for tailored business wear, Ross clung to his heavy academic corduroy, and Joey transitioned from 90s grunge to a very clean bachelor aesthetic. Clothing wasn't just fashion here. It was an active agent of character development.
And of course, you can't talk about the show's material culture without mentioning the Rachel haircut. Created by Chris McMillan, it became a massive global phenomenon. This one single aesthetic choice perfectly encapsulates how the show didn't just reflect 90s trends, it actively dictated global styling by validating these effortless textured looks that millions of people ended up adopting.
Next up, Section 4, Viewing Through a Modern Lens.
So, when we pull the series out of its original 1990s cultural context and view it objectively today, modern critics point out some significant structural biases. First is the profound lack of racial diversity. Despite being set in Greenwich Village, only 27 black actors had speaking roles across 236 episodes, which presented a sanitized, overwhelmingly white urban fantasy. Critics also highlight the show's reliance on fat-phobic tropes, specifically using Fat Monica as a recurring punchline. Furthermore, the humor frequently relied on homophobic panic, and critics point to systemic transphobia, particularly in the constant misgendering and mockery of Chandler's transgender parent. Now, in response to these critiques, the creators have engaged in some pretty unprecedented public reckonings for a legacy television property. Co-creator Marta Kaufman has expressed profound regret, publicly stating, "Pronouns were not yet something that I understood. That was a mistake." She has openly acknowledged her unconscious complicity in systemic industry bias at the time. And Kaufman's reconciliation actually went beyond apologies. In 2022, she pledged $4 million to Brandeis University to fund a professorship in the African and African American Studies Department. At the same time, actors like David Schwimmer have highlighted their historical efforts to push for diverse casting during the show's run. All of this really reminds audiences of the complex tension between a show's 1990s context, a time where things like a lesbian wedding on network TV were highly groundbreaking, and today's socio-political standards.
Finally, we reach Section 5, the billion-dollar aftermarket.
The financial trajectory of this property is just mind-blowing. It started back in 1998, making $4 million an episode in broadcast syndication. By 2002, NBC paid $10 million an episode for the final season. Then, the digital streaming wars hit. Netflix paid $120 million for an exclusive deal in 2014, and by 2019, Warner Media spent a historic $425 million just to reclaim the show for HBO Max. It transformed from a local syndication staple into literally the ultimate defensive asset for streaming platforms. But you know, a massive part of this financial architecture was actually built by the cast themselves. By banding together in collective bargaining, the 6 leads established a groundbreaking compensation model, earning an equalized $1 million per episode by season 10. This left Warner Bros. Absorbing the high production costs initially in exchange for those massive long-term global windfalls we just talked about. And to really put the power of this property into perspective, $20 million. That is the estimated total cost paid just to the 6 actors for their unscripted 2021 HBO Max reunion special, just to sit in a room together and chat for an hour decades after the show ended.
Which leaves us with this one final thought. How does a 1993 concept about 20-somethings drinking coffee remain the ultimate anchor for premium digital subscription economies 3 decades later? That question alone proves the unmatched structural genius of this surrogate family. I hope this explainer gave you a totally new perspective on the deliberate architecture behind the phenomenon. Thanks for hanging out with me, and keep exploring.